So just give it a couple of seconds. I'm just going to organize my articles here. Uh, for those that weren't here last week, and those that were, we're just going to continue our look into Zechariah of 12 and 14, and see if we can kind of come to grips a little bit from a biblical perspective as to what's going on today. And then we're going to move from there into Ezekiel 38. And most of us have been here and gone through the Ezekiel study at least a couple of times. But I think it's important to update, and there's some that haven't heard it recently. So we're moving from there to there. So before we get to that, just a couple of articles. Are we in?
Uh, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
A couple of articles I wanted to go over. Just so much going on. We say that every week, but uh, it doesn't matter what area you look at. It's just one more thing that absolutely relates to the second coming of the Lord. But here's an article. This whole thing with Israel and the role that the United States is trying to take in deterring and convincing uh, Israel to stop their move on Hamas, and uh, I think what we're going to see is, and we're going to see it both here as well as other places we'll see tonight. But God's not going to forget that we're supposed to honor and respect and support His chosen people, and not to do so, as we've seen from the Abrahamic covenant, means we're going to be cursed in no uncertain terms. So here's an article. Blinken warns major Rafah op risks global isolation, long-term security harm for Israel. So Blinken is basically threatening Israel, telling them that you've got to stop these tactics. You've got to end this battle. You got to pull out. When to do so would be it would be a horrible mistake. But uh, Secretary issues a warning as not Netanyahu told him that the IDF, or Israeli Defense Forces, must eliminate Hamas in its last stronghold, that being the town of Rafah in Gaza to the south. Blinken also says Israel will be stuck in Gaza for years unless it has a day after plan. Everything that they do, and you can believe that Netanyahu and the Israeli government has all the plans they need. And I don't think that they need the United States or anybody else telling them what to do. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu doubled down on the message he has expressed in recent days that while Israel will happily work with the U.S. on improving the humanitarian situation and evacuating civilians from Gaza's southernmost city of Rafah, a military operation there is inevitable. In other words, they're going to do it. They're going to finish off Hamas. Blinken said he told Netanyahu in response, however, that a major ground offensive in Rafah was not the way to defeat Hamas. And I'm not sure I've ever heard that Blinken has any military experience, but here he is telling Israel that doing so would be a major mistake, and there's better ways to do it. He warns starkly that it would risk more civilian fatalities, undermine aid assistance, risk greater isolation for Israel, and endanger Israel's security and international standing. So these things, this last bullet, risk greater isolation for Israel and endanger Israel's security and international standing. We know that. We know that because that's what the Bible says is going to happen. So uh, he's just basically reiterating or uh, saying what the Bible's already told us. In a video statement after meeting with Blinken, Netanyahu said, quote, I told him that I deeply appreciate the fact that for more than 5 months we stood together in the war against Hamas. I told him we recognize the need to evacuate the civilian population. We went through that little talk last week about how Israel does so much to make sure that civilians are taken care of, and the ratio of civilians to enemy combatants is like 1 to 1, or maybe 1.5 to 1, which is unheard of in any military theater ever. Um, that I told him we recognize the need to evacuate the civilian population. They've even gone so far as to say when they do get to Rafah, they're going to help to escort people out. Now, we've talked last week about how they'll send the bulletins, and they'll make phone calls, and they'll broadcast that they're coming, and even set up escape routes. And so, in spite of everything they do, the international media and people like Blinken and others are saying that they're not doing what they should do. And buying in to this 30,000 death narrative, which in terms of the total, maybe that's true. But along with that, they always say it consists of 70% children and women. And there's no way. That's there's just no way. You never hear about enemy combatants that have been killed from our wonderful media. I also told them we don't have a way to defeat Hamas without going into Rafah and eliminating the remaining battalions there. And I told him that I hope that we will do it with America's support. But if we need, we will do it alone, he said. So here we go. Israel's going to be alone in the world, just as the Bible tells us. And we have, all of this. And really, it's if you read in Zechariah, I can't remember where it is. I think it might be in Zechariah 8, if I can't find it. But uh, he refers to Israel as, or maybe it's two. Let me just look. Well, I can't remember exactly where it is, but God refers to Israel as the apple of his eye, and he's looking upon it constantly. And I mentioned this before, but uh, to go against Israel is like sticking a finger in God's eye. That's how serious he takes it. Uh, Blinken held one-on-one meetings with both Netanyahu and the War Cabinet Minister Benny Gantz on Friday, along with the War Cabinet. Blinken told reporters that a major military ground operation in Rafah is not the way to do it. It risks killing more civilians. And I can tell you right now, that's just such a straw man argument, because Israel will do everything they can to protect all of the civilians that will be there. It risks wreaking greater havoc with the delivery of humanitarian assistance. It risks further isolating Israel around the world and jeopardizing its long-term security and standing. Blinken said on the Ben Gurion airport tarmac just before boarding a plane to depart. So it's like they've elevated it. They keep raising it a notch every so often to get more intense and more severe against Israel. Um, you don't understand this. Well, he says he'll be Blinken says he warned that if Israel does not come up with a plan for the day after Hamas, it will be stuck in Gaza for years. I don't know where he comes up with this. You don't understand this, Blinken said. And when you do, it might be too late. I mean, just the arrogance, the audacity to speak that way to what is absolutely the most humanitarian uh, approach to war in the history of humanity is just beyond belief. Here's another article, and this is, let me just say this, that this could be it for Canada. And Canada's got a lot of problems, not the least of which is an absolutely dictatorial prime minister. And the man he's just the most power hungry. He's a card carrying, big time member of the World Economic Forum. He's there with the rest of the globalists. But here's an article entitled Canada's Betrayal of Israel. Remember, God's going to curse those who curse Israel. Canadian-born Israeli MK Sharon Haskell described as a betrayal Ottawa's decision to halt arms sales to the Jewish state and its latest motion on Palestinian statehood. I am so angry. Canada was always held as a symbol of democracy and a nation that values and defends freedom, liberties, and inclusiveness. Trudeau's government is telling the world that Israel doesn't have the right to defend itself against crimes against humanity, and this is moral bankruptcy. Canada completely lost its moral compass and cannot be seen as a strong democracy anymore, she added. On Tuesday, Israeli Foreign Minister Israel Katz slammed Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau following Ottawa's announcement that Canada would halt arms sales to Israel. Anybody know that was happening? No. It's just unbelievable. Canadian arms exports to Israel amounted to over 15.4 million in 2022, according to Canadian government data. Canada's decision followed the non-binding resolution passed by the House of Commons on Monday, whose draft initially called for the unilateral recognition of a Palestinian state. What's God say about that? They divided my land, and we're just, it's just amazing how we're watching things come together so quickly and so precisely. We don't know all the precise details, as we'll see when we try to go through some of the stuff in Zechariah 12, but we know that things are happening at such a breakneck pace. And I've mentioned over and over again, to me, the most telling prophecy that we're seeing come to fruition today is just the explosion of anti-Semitism. The motion basically says that Trudeau's government stands in support of radical Islam, even as Israel fights a second independence war, which we did not seek, in which we were forced into by a murderous terrorist organization that Canada itself listed as such. To Haskell, Trudeau's government has completely failed the Jewish community in Canada, which is under violent attack. Canadian Jews are taking down their symbols, hiding their identity because Trudeau's government has failed to protect them. History is going to remember this as one of the greatest moral failures of the Canadian government. And I would venture to say, watch and see what happens. They're going to come under severe judgment. It doesn't mean it's going to happen tomorrow or the next day, but some serious things are going to happen there. I don't know what God will, he'll send judgment. There's just no question. Canada is supposed to be a true friend of Israel, and this feels like betrayal. It's not just only the latest developments, it's also voting against Israel at the UN. It's some of the rhetoric that they have used with respect to Israel's effort to destroy Hamas in Gaza. In November, Trudeau accused Israel of killing civilians in Gaza. I urge the government of Israel to exercise maximum restraint. The world is watching on TV, on social media. We're hearing the testimony of doctors, family members, survivors, kids who have lost their parents. I mean, it's just propaganda, and he's buying into it. The world, that doesn't mean that civilians and others aren't being killed in Gaza. They are. I mean, collateral damage is an unfortunate fact of war. He goes on to say the world is witnessing the killing of women, of children, of babies. This has to stop. That is a total, unadulterated lie. Trudeau received approval from Hamas after Canada's affirmative UN vote on December 12th to a resolution calling for an immediate, sustainable ceasefire in Israel's war against Hamas. So it's more of the same. And it's not just the United States that's turning against Israel, it's the whole world. Again, everything is global in nature. Um, at the end of the book of Daniel, this is kind of interesting. Let's go and read a verse there. Daniel is, and hopefully, Sometime we should probably go through it word by word, verse by verse, because it's such a powerful, powerful book. But in Daniel chapter 4, I'm sorry, Daniel chapter 12, my Bible refers to it as this chapter as, quote, the end times. And it says, at that time, Michael, the great prince who protects your people, will arise. There will be a time of distress such as not happened from the beginning of nations until then. So this is well into the future. So this is a prophecy about the tribulation written in the book of Daniel, 500 years BC or so. But at that time, your people, the Jewish people, everyone whose name is founded written in the book of life will be delivered. It goes on to say, multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake, some to everlasting life, others to shame and everlasting contempt. So, just as an aside, we have in the future the rapture of the church that will take place. That will happen, I think, pretty solidly believed before the tribulation starts. Then at the end of the tribulation, the Old Testament Jews that passed away will be resurrected, as it says here, some to everlasting life and some to eternal contempt, everlasting contempt. That happens at the end of the tribulation, at the very beginning of the millennial kingdom, which is also the same time as those who accepted Christ will be resurrected during the tribulation, will be resurrected. Interesting when you read in Revelation that they're calling out for revenge for what's happened to them. They'll be resurrected at the very end of the tribulation as well. And then at the end of the millennial kingdom is what's known as the Great White Throne Judgment. And that's where all of those that have died during the church age that did not accept Christ, remember those who died in Christ will be resurrected, given their new bodies before the tribulation, whereas those who didn't accept Christ will remain in the grave, and they'll be resurrected at the end of the millennial kingdom, and then they'll go before God Almighty, at which time there's no believers that are partaking in that judgment. It's just unbelievers during the church age, and they're going to be condemned to eternal damnation at that point. So that's kind of a series of resurrections that are going to take place between now and the end of the millennial kingdom. Those who are wise will shine like the brightness of the heavens, and those who lead many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. But you, Daniel, remember, Daniel is recording all of these things well in advance. And his mind's just, his brain's about ready to explode. And what do all these things mean? And it says, you, Daniel, roll up and seal the words of the scroll until the time of the end. Many will go here and there to increase knowledge. So, what's being stated here is that the end, the time in which we're in now, we'll be able to understand all of the things that are recorded in Daniel. Daniel couldn't. There were still a couple of empires yet to come that he prophesied about that had not yet come into existence. He was in the part of the Babylonian and then the Persian Empire, but yet he prophesied about the coming Greek Empire and then the Roman Empire, and then finally the 10 member nations, the revived Roman Empire, which we're watching develop today. But he says, roll up the words, seal the words of the scroll until the time it will end. Many will go here and there to increase knowledge. And I want to read an article that talks about that. Then I, Daniel, looked, and there before me stood two others, one on the bank of the river and the other on the opposite bank. We won't read any further, but um, it's interesting that Daniel faithfully and thankfully faithfully recorded all these things. He's told to roll up the scroll, and previously we saw that he would not be able to understand it. but today we have the ability to do just that. So speaking about an increase in knowledge, and it's also says in here that there'll be an increase in travel. It also says there'll be an increase in hunger for knowledge. And I believe what that means is as we get closer to the time of the end into the tribulation, it's going to be awful hard to find biblical evidence. People that, like us, will be gone. And so people are going to be running to and fro, trying to understand what's going on, which is why many of us think that we should probably leave little things behind, like books and pamphlets and things to tell people, hey, here's what happened, when you see that millions of people suddenly disappeared. But here's a an article talking about an increase in knowledge, and probably most of us know these things, but I thought it was kind of interesting. Recognize the times, mankind's exponential increase in knowledge. And boy, you just look around and see what's going on with AI and medical advances and so forth. But the prophet Daniel had been listening intently to the ancient Gabriel pronouncing a series of mind blowing messages. God was revealing the rise and fall of great empires, leading eventually to a global empire led by a despot whom the Apostle John would later call the Antichrist, with its inevitable demise at the divine hand of God. Of course, all these great empires were still far off in the future from Daniel's perspective. Rubbing his wrinkled forehead in confusion, Daniel requested God's mighty messenger to provide some elaboration. To his dismay, the angel replied with a firm, "No way." He explained that Daniel could never fully understand these prophecies because too many events needed to happen first before they could be fulfilled and therefore properly understood. Talking about an exciting time to live in. If you think about it, we're watching God's hand up close and personal, and we have all of this amazing information to help us out. Fortunately, Gabriel added there would be three major signs that would mark the time of the end, in which in which the finale in this series of events would culminate uh, in Daniel 12:4. But as for you, Daniel, conceal these words, as we just read, seal up the book till the time of the end. Many will go to and fro, and knowledge will increase. He added that only those living in the end times who were wise, meaning spiritually discerning, would at last understand these prophecies. They would recognize that the exponential increase in knowledge, travel, and prophetic understanding would herald the end of these human controlled kingdoms. It gets to knowledge, then it gets to technology and AI. You wonder how much further we can go because really everything that the Antichrist will need to run his evil kingdom, to be this evil, lead this evil regime during the tribulations in place. He doesn't need that much more in terms of technology, but um, increase in knowledge. Let's explore the first time a great increase in knowledge. Unless you're a toddler playing with your mother's Android, you've lived long enough to realize that the way we obtain information has changed a whole lot over the last few decades. The child attaining adulthood today with a shudder look back to the early 2000s when there was no Wikipedia, no Gmail, no social media like Facebook and Twitter, now called X, no cloud computing, no tablets, no smartphones, and certainly no high speed internet connectivity. We know all about that, right? The three of us, we could. Yeah. For thousands of years of human history, life remained pretty much the same. Sure, every 300 years or so, the world eked out an innovation that revolutionized the world, moving humanity from, say, the Bronze Age to the Iron Age. But for the most part, limitations in travel left most inventions cordoned off to a tiny corner of the world. Were you surprised to learn from your history classes that the most wide changing advances were made in just the last 150 years or so. And as we got closer to our day and age, how each discovery came faster and faster as one breakthrough was achieved after another. This is called the exponential curve. Our knowledge has been experiencing exponential growth as one breakthrough builds upon another at an increasingly faster and faster pace. What would you say was the most important discovery? If you answered the computer, you'd be correct. How do you know when your computer is obsolete? The answer is when you take it out of the box. Computer companies double computer processing speeds about every 18 months. In 2023, quantum computers began processing at speeds equivalent to the human brain. By 2045, in a mere quarter of a century, Moore's law predicts we will possess computers with the computational ability equivalent to the entire human race. That's if the Lord tarries that long, obviously. Computer technology increased our knowledge to stupendous levels, but computers have aided in all of the major scientific discoveries of our day. We don't need to cram so many facts into our brains anymore. For the ability to easily store and access data means we can continue to learn like we've never learned before in human history. The exponential curve is just not limited to computers. Other advances in biomedicine, space science, chemical engineering, human engineering, all the other sciences have been climbing faster and steeper up their exponential curves with each passing day. It's expected in the next 5 years, the world's technology will be 32 times more advanced than it is today. In 5 years. I mean, I can't even imagine what that's like. Maybe, John, maybe you have some ideas. 65% of today's kindergartners, once they finally graduate from college, will ultimately end up working in completely new jobs that, at this time, don't yet even exist. Today's exponential increase in knowledge points to the fact that we are living in prophesied end times and that Jesus is coming soon. And then he talks about an increase in transportation. Go back to the 20th century as it was beginning, horse and buggies, and now we've got spaceships going 24, or, you know, going to the moon and 24,000 miles an hour and so forth. Stop and think how people traveled just a single century ago. Most roads weren't even paved yet and were traveled along by horse-drawn wagons. Watch on YouTube the video of San Francisco recorded back in 1906, and you'll see far more horses than horseless carriages. People rarely, if ever, left their hometowns. Animal domestication in the early beginnings of decent roads, then bicycles, balloons, boats, simple automobiles were developing, but not widely received. Since the early part of the 20th century, mankind went on to invent airplanes and jets, and we've even left Earth's atmosphere in rockets and space shuttles. It used to take months for people to travel overseas by boat, but now we travel that same distance abroad in mere hours. In today's world, people are always on the move, just as the angel prophesied to Daniel. So that's just one more, I think, piece of evidence. One more real quick, and this gets into, I'm just going to hit some highlights on this, but I think perhaps the one person, if you really want to know where we are on world events, to look to and how things are deteriorating rapidly and why is just look at Bill Gates. Bill Gates is he's an oligarch. He's certainly a member of the elites, and he is just involved and got his hands in everything. So here's just an article. Bill Gates confirms digital IDs. We've talked about central bank digital currency, and that's. I was just listening to somebody the other day who um, is not a believer, talking about CBDCs, and right now in our government we have people that are resisting it, but one crisis and will very likely be thrown into CBDCs and could be very quickly. So that's still developing.
What is that?
Central bank digital currencies. Yeah. Uh, Digital IDs is another thing. Well, he's a believer in digital IDs that everybody needs to have an identification. Now, why would they want digital IDs connected to central bank digital currency? Control. That's how they control. That's what they will do to control people. And they'll use fear, just like with the COVID thing. So much fear associated with that. And what they did is they just took a little more control and took away a little bit of our freedom. And now I think the next big device could be a big black swan event of some kind could come. But the next thing on the agenda is climate change, which is just one more way. I mean, they're talking already about carbon credits and carbon taxes and restricting travel. And look what our government's doing I mean, you can't find a incandescent light bulb anymore. They're gone. And they're trying to outlaw stoves and they're trying to outlaw gas blowers. You got a big supply of.
I got a
Okay, I
way
don't.
big supply.
I wish we had done that.
Well, you
But
know,
anyway, we're seeing it. It's kind of like the frog in the pot. You know, you throw them in the cold water and you turn the heat up slowly, and they just boil to death. You throw them into a hot pot, they'll just jump right out. So it's
one of the grocery stores that we went into in Naples, Florida, you can use your finger.
goodness. Yeah, yeah. Well, it's the next thing. Biometrics is a big part of this. The United Nations, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and partners of the Rockefeller Foundation. I'm reading a couple of books lately, and this whole Rockefeller thing is all over it. You talk about evil origins. It goes back to the early 20s. And the Rockefellers, David, the founding Rockefeller, is the one who founded Standard Oil, which was the oil company. It was like it had a lock on everything. And they've since gotten into healthcare. And one of the Rockefellers, and it's been, can't quote it exactly, but it's something to the effect stated that they accuse us, speaking of the Rockefellers, of wanting to have a one world government, to be able to gain control, to do this, this, and this. And to that, I plead guilty. So that's their agenda. And Gates is tied into it. It's all about globalization. It's all about this one world system. If you think about it, it has to be in place during the tribulation. It has to be a one world government. Now, that one world system will consist of 10 probably regions with a leader in charge of each one that ultimately Antichrist will come up and he'll take control over. And I think I mentioned that that's been recommended many times that we establish it, that the world go establish a 10 region system. The United Nations Development Program has announced plans to roll out digital IDs worldwide by the year 2030. If you want to find out where they think they're headed, just Google Agenda 2030. And it's a UN/World Economic Forum plot that all of these things will be in place by 2030. And they will be mandatory digital IDs for people who wish to participate in society. You know, they already have that in China with the social credit scores and the digital identity. And this is what Gates and the Rockefellers and all these other groups are trying to do. They're trying to accelerate it. Digital IDs, digital payments, data sharing in 50 countries, which we'll get to in a moment. While it's the Agenda 2030, this new plan is 5 and 50, which means in 5 years they will accomplish what they want to accomplish in 50 nations, kind of like a test of 50 nations to implement all this stuff. Um, the push for digital public infrastructure, which includes, it's a complete infrastructure, digital IDs, vaccine passports, Central bank digital currency is being championed by the globalist World Economic Forum, and unsurprisingly is backed by Bill Gates along with the U. I mean, you look at what Bill Gates is doing. He's making money off of vaccines. He actually came out and in 1999 or 2000 convened a meeting with members of the World Economic Forum and others planning for a coming uh, pandemic before it happened.
Mhm.
And it's just that now they've had these other planning things for a coming for another virus. You know, they call it disease X. Have you heard about disease X? This
No.
is an unknown pandemic. They don't even know what it is or where it's coming from, but it's going to be deadlier than the first one, and they're already developing vaccines for it. Disease X. The digital, look that, just don't believe me, just Google it.
The vaccine will be meant to kill you.
Huh?
And the vaccine will be meant to kill you.
You know,
Because along with
yeah,
that, in around 2000,
yeah,
I'd heard that he also forced, well, possibly forced some of the chemicals, the pharmaceutical companies to create a vaccine, which they then put on, or, sold to elderly people saying, this is the last vaccine you'll ever need, which turned out to be true. But the thing is that 6 months to the day, over 250. There was one lady that managed to go through numerous um, organ replacements, but everyone else on the same day, their entire innards disintegrated. In other words, everybody in the vaccine experiment passed away from the same thing on the same day.
yeah,
This is what he's planning for the world.
yeah.
Where is this one?
I'm not. I think it might have been Washington State or somewhere, probably out west.
Yeah, sadly, one of the things that they that they feel they have to do is to reduce the population. Um,
Mhm.
Gates has come out. I read it in a book and very well documented book that he feels that the world population ought to be capped at 8.3 billion and not go above that. That's why we're seeing, in the United States right now, we don't, the birth rates in this country are not keeping up with productivity needs. I think a country needs what, 2 children or 2.4 children on average, and we're now down to 1.8 or 1.5,
Yeah.
you
I
know?
report yesterday, 1.7.
Yeah,
There was an article about a woman who's talking about, let's see, she had a name for it, but anyhow, women who want to have more children, more than five or more. And so, um, once they get started, with a couple of children, some of them just say, well, this is what I meant for, rather than what the world says, you've got to have your occupation and,
right,
and children are of inconsequence.
right. The push for DPI includes again digital IDs, vaccine passports, CBDCs, is being championed by the globalist World Economic Forum, backed by Bill Gates, along with the UN and the European Union. This is not some small conspiracy. These are the big boys. These are the players. Advocates are adamant that EPI is essential for participation in markets and society. So it's not a stretch to go from EPI with all this tokenization and digitizing to biometrics, which, like Patty was saying, the fingerprint. If you go to the airport now, your eyes are all scanned, that, the mark will be there, and talks about participation in markets and society. Advocates are adamant that DPI is essential. But what are they saying? Um, they're saying that if you're not in the system and being tracked and being monitored, you won't be able to buy or sell. Where have we ever heard that before?
Mhm.
Right? Revelation 13. Now, that's where this is all headed. Make no mistake, the one world system, the global government, the collapse of the economies, all these things are leading build back better, you know.
They are going to cut Medicare. I don't know if you've been
I heard
watching
that.
that.
Yeah.
There's that coming. And that'll be
Yeah.
here by next year.
Yeah. Okay, so if successful, DPI will give governments and corporations the power to implement systems of social credit, which they already have in China, that can determine where and how you travel, what you're allowed to consume, how you will be able to transact with your programmable money. So it's all coming. It's all about control. And look at what's going on with the energy thing, with oil, and what's going on in just the last 3.5 years in this country. We were a major exporter of oil. Now we're not. Now we're depending on Venezuela and other countries to provide us with oil. So you can see it's all part, everything that you see going on is all part of this plan to ultimately get to this one world system. I won't go on with more of this. It gets in a little bit into the 50 and 5 program, which I just mentioned, which they're accelerating this 2030 agenda up to hopefully what they believe will be 2028. So we're going to see if what they do happens, they're going to see all this stuff take place by 2028, or a lot of it.
Did you hear today about the UN vote where the US abstained in the Security Council to support Israel?
Right,
So they took a stand essentially against Israel.
right.
I'm looking at Amir Safaki's comments today, and just two of them real quickly. One of them, he says, a dreadful betrayal. Biden thinks he can win the next election by throwing Israel under the bus. But then more to the point of this class, he says, I am neither surprised nor disappointed. My Bible has always taught me that as we approach the Ezekiel war, there will be no one who will stand in support of Israel. Because of God's promise found in the Abrahamic covenant to bless those who bless Israel and curse those who curse it, I am not more concerned for my American friends than for the Israeli government or military.
Wow.
Sounds like you hit it right on the head.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just think about 10 million illegals. And they're illegals because they're not coming in here legally. I don't care what you call it. In this country, of which 2 million are gotaways, which means they just snuck in and nobody knows where they are. And 30,000 uh, Chinese, whatever they call them here. What are they here for?
Military age men.
Yeah, yeah. And 130 different countries. And now Mexico's saying they're not going to take them back, unless we comply with certain requests. I mean, I'm not too worried about people from that part of the world, but it's the people from the Middle East and the Far East. And, if anybody doesn't think that there are terror cells in this country waiting, ready all they're waiting for is just the word. And we're going to see potentially some pretty horrific things.
Last night on 60 Minutes, they had the president of Mexico on there.
I heard that.
And he turned around and said, the wall is not going to keep people out. There's so many tunnels
Right.
underneath that they're just coming in under. It has nothing to do with that wall. He said you can build it as big as you want it. There's too many tunnels underneath to come
Well,
right
the
here.
question is, why are we seeing such an increase, such a surge in people coming over the border that we did not see during the prior administration? Why? I'm here to say that it's intentional. They're doing it to bring us down. Whether there's tunnels underneath the wall or not, it doesn't matter. This administration is build back better. And who was that? Ricky was saying earlier, you don't have to build back better unless you tear it down first. That's what build back better is all about.
I think you may see an independent in here for the first time.
Hmm.
I think just people are tired of the other two.
Yeah, I
That's
agree.
what I'm beginning to see.
Yeah. Me? Yeah. Sorry about that. So at any rate,
Hour.
yeah, my nephew. Okay, questions, comments?
So, heard that many people from Middle East, would they go first just to Canada? Because that's like they jump to Canada because they have open
Right,
doors in Canada, and then that's how they come
right.
into the United States.
You know, Isaiah says in Isaiah 5, we've read this before. Again, once again, I can't seem to find it. I'm losing my touch here. But anyway, it says that they will say what is right is wrong, what is evil is, what is right is wrong, and what is evil is right. Everything will be turned on its head. And that's exactly what we're,
20.
yeah, okay, thank you. Isaiah 5, verse 20. Yep. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. So this is what we're seeing today. We're in a time when what is evil is good and what is good is evil. I mean, just look at what's happening with our kids. Look at the gender reaffirming stuff. I mean, I've heard some accounts recently that just I wouldn't even dare repeat how serious and horrific it is that people that have these operations, they bleed for the rest of their lives, but yet there are people that advocate this sort of thing. And it's just insane. But yet that's what's happened. Satan has got such a control, such a handle on this world, unlike anything we've ever seen. And
That,
if
the new $1 trillion bill that was just, the budget for the US includes a lot of money for gender.
Yeah, right,
Yeah.
right, right. And again, talk about so many different things. I mean, this immigration thing, which I think is a huge, huge issue for us. I mean, it's just going to destroy us. It really is. I mean, it can't go on. And everybody knows what's happening, but they won't do anything about it. They won't address it. He could stop it tomorrow, but he won't do it. Instead, they're blaming the other party for it, which is just lies and more lies, deceit, unlike anything we've ever seen. It's just, but Jesus said, when he was asked for the signs of the end of the age, be careful, be on the watch that no one deceives you. Now, we know there's so much deception going on because they're moving their lips. It doesn't matter who you listen to. It's everywhere.
Yeah.
It's everywhere. It's just it's who is it? One of the I don't know if it was a mirror or somebody that said not too long ago, within the last few months, that there's such a dark satanic cloud over the world today that you can't even believe it. And who knows where we're headed? I mean, if the Lord tarries, I mean, look back a year, look back 2 years, and ask yourself. I don't think we can picture it, but what's it going to be like a year from now?
Yeah, you can't picture.
No, no. So,
Politicians talk in such double speak and with so many lies. Rush Limbaugh used to say, after he would hear a quote that someone said, he'd say, "Now let me tell you what they really meant."
yeah,
And
yeah,
he was right on because
it
he
was.
could interpret what the real
Yep,
meaning was.
absolutely. All right, I want to get back into Zechariah 12. And I must say that what I'm going to talk about now is subject to a lot of interpretation, and there's different people with different views. But I think last week, for those that were here, we started by looking at Psalm 83, which is a psalm that just a quick review of it. It prophesies, if you will, Psalm 83. This is some say that what's being depicted here is a war, a coming war. I don't know as I necessarily subscribe to that for a variety of reasons, but I think what we see here is we go through this is and we saw the inner circle of enemies surrounding Israel, being starting with Egypt and then Gaza and then Lebanon and Syria and Jordan and Iraq and even Saudi Arabia. Those are the nations that are referenced here in uh, Psalm 83, and how in verse 5 it states that with one mind. And I find that to be significant because you have groups of Muslims, some of which are Sunnis and some of which are Shias. They hate each other. But yet, the one thing that they agree upon is what? Get rid of Israel. Because it says here, with one mind, they plot together. Even though they hate each other, they form an alliance against who? Not against Israel, but against you, against God. And that's what I mean or that's what we talk about when it gets to the Abrahamic covenant. That he says he's going to bless and curse those who bless and curse, etc. Because he created Israel, he formed Israel. It's his, and he's given the Jews the right to occupy and to control it. He's given it to them, and so this is the only. He didn't independently, for any purpose, create the United States or France or Paris or Great Britain. He created the nation of Israel. And so when it says here, they plot, they form an alliance against you, and then he goes on to identify all of these different nations. And in verse 12 says, who said, let us take possession of the pasture lands of God? Man, that's what we're seeing today, big time. All of these countries, the United States saying you need a two-state solution, the European Union saying you need a two-state solution, but yet the Arabs are not interested in a two-state solution. They want a one-state solution because they want to take possession, not part of it, but all of it. And they go on and it says, back up to verse 4. Come, they say, let us destroy them as a nation. And this hatred has never been greater. Think about Iran, think about Hezbollah, think about Hamas and all these groups. What's their objective? From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. That's not a two-state solution. That's all of Israel. I mean, you go back to Egypt under Anwar or under whatever the original prime minister's name was of huh? No, before him.
Oh.
That his goal was to back in '67. His goal was to wipe Israel off the face of the map, to drive them into the Mediterranean Sea. That's been the objective right from the very beginning. Uh, they form so that Israel's name is remembered no more. And again, with one mind, they plot together. So I think what we're seeing today, not necessarily that this is a war, even though there are some scholars who say it is, but I can tell you, having read a lot of different accounts, including this book I have here by somewhere.
Underneath your Bible.
Oh, okay. This book here, it's a short book and it deals primarily with this topic, and ultimately it talks about Ezekiel 38 and 39. It's a good little resource book. Huh?
What's the name of it?
The name of it is The Middle East Meltdown: The Coming Islamic Invasion of Israel by Dr. Andy Woods. Um, he doesn't believe, if you go through this, that this depicts a war, and most of them don't. But I think what's telling here is that the nations that are listed, most of them are against Israel today. You've got the tents of Edom. That's Gaza. You have Tyre, which is Lebanon, which is Hezbollah. You have Assyria, which is Syria. So most of the nations here are currently against Israel and part of this inner circle that's trying to lead them to the point where they remember no more. So,
But with all this lawlessness and stuff, don't you think that's also being happening now?
oh,
With all these countries
a-
all, and
absolutely,
everybody fighting and everybody thinking of themselves?
absolutely. Huge, huge sign. Huge sign. And Jesus prophesied about that. He said there'll be lawlessness in the last days. And he goes on to say all these things that he mentions will be like birth pangs, and they're going to get worse and worse and more intense as time goes on. And boy, are we seeing that big time in this country. Okay, so back to Zechariah chapter 12. And we'll go through this and then a little bit of 14. And once we get done with that, we'll move right back into Ezekiel 38. And we'll get as far as we can tonight. And then next week we'll start with Ezekiel 38 and 39, kind of an update as to where we are with that. So in Jeremiah, and I think I mentioned last week that 12, 13, 14 are three of the most prophetic end time chapters in the Bible. They track very much with Daniel, they track with Revelation, and I think are pretty amazing. And we've read this so many times, but I want to dig a little bit deeper. A prophecy, I'm in Zechariah 12:1. A prophecy, the word of the Lord concerning Israel. So this is a prophecy coming from God Himself regarding Israel. And now, just to put some credibility on what he's going to lay out, the Lord provides in the rest of verse 1 his credentials. He says, the Lord who stretches out the heavens, he created the heavens and the earth. That's who's going to be providing and giving us his prophecy. Who lays the foundation of the earth, who forms the human spirit within a person. So this is the one who created the heavens and the earth, the one, and when he says forms the human spirit, I believe is saying technically or essentially that we're created in God's image, exactly as stated in Genesis 1, I think it's verse 37. And he also talks about one man and one woman, not multiple genders, but one in one in that same thing. And he goes on to say, I am going to make Jerusalem a cup that sends all the surrounding peoples. And let me pull up that chart again, if I could, or that map. Okay, so here is what we call the inner circle. These are the nations that I believe are referenced um, in Psalm 83. And then when it talks about, I'm going to make Jerusalem a cup that sends all surrounding peoples reeling. That's surrounding. This group here, this circle of nations is distinct and separate from what we're going to see in the Ezekiel 38 invasion. It's a different thing. I'm going to make Jerusalem. Think about what would happen if Israel were to sacrifice that red heifer, say in by Passover or sometime around Passover this year. And we've already seen it that one Hamas leader has come out and said that they heard that Israel is going to do that, which is one of the main reasons why they attacked on October 7th. And that's tied into Jerusalem. It's tied into the Temple Mount. And so if they did it, and I think it's probably 50-50 that they will, because if those three red heifers are four to they, I think it's three that currently meet the requirements. If they get too old, then they can't do it. They have to be 3 years old or in their third year.
So aren't they supposed to be doing that?
What they do is they sacrifice a red heifer. It has to be a perfect red heifer. And then they burn it into ashes and mix it with water. And when they do that, it creates like a paste. And the priests have to be, they have to have this on them, a, almost like a Lent type of thing, where you're going to get the ashes. But they get the ashes of the red heifer that purifies them so that they can go into the temple to perform their offerings and sacrifices. So there's a lot of implications. They wouldn't do it. They wouldn't sacrifice this red heifer unless they were ready to reinitiate temple sacrifices, which requires what? A temple. And that's what we read about in Daniel. That's what we read about Second Thessalonians.
They were talking about that just recently, that during Lent is the time, and I forgot the number they had given,
Right,
and they said that we are within it.
right. So I'm going to make Jerusalem and going to make, and notice as you go through these coming judgments and everything, that it's God who's doing it. And so we see all these things happening. God's orchestrating events. Let's take a just quick look at Revelation chapter 17, just so that we have a kind of a better idea perhaps of what's going on here. In Revelation 17, verse 17, and this is talking about the 10 horns and the beast and the end times religious system. Well, let's just start at verse 16. The beast and the 10 horns you saw will hate the prostitute. So what this is a reference to is Antichrist and his 10 cohorts will hate the prostitute. The prostitute is the false religious system that's going to be in place during the tribulation. He's going to allow it, Antichrist is going to allow it to come into play, but uh, because he's so arrogant and egotistical, the false prophet kind of treads on his turf a little bit. But he said, they bring her to ruin and leave her naked. They will eat her flesh and burn her with fire. Then it goes on to say, for God has put it into their hearts to accomplish his purpose by agreeing to hand over the beast the royal authority until God's words are fulfilled. So you can apply this verse, not to take it out of context. It's really referring to the false prophet and the Antichrist, but it's God who's orchestrating things. He's putting these thoughts into people and causing them to do what they do. And so he's in charge. And you see that throughout that you go through Zechariah 12. I am going to make Jerusalem a cup that sends all surrounding peoples reeling. Judah will be besieged as well as Jerusalem. And if this inner circle is an indication, you can see that all of Israel is surrounded. This is, it says there, on that day when nations of the earth are gathered against her, I, God's going to do it, will make Jerusalem an immovable rock for all the nations. All who try to move it will injure themselves. So there's come a point in time when the status of Jerusalem is going to become such a problem for the world, but yet they're not going to be able to move it out of the way. If they try to, they're going to get hurt. They're going to get injured. Something's going to happen because you don't mess around with Jerusalem. That doesn't mean that Israel and Jerusalem are not going to go through some pretty tough times, but God is doing it. On that day, I will strike every horse with panic and its rider with madness, declares the Lord. Now, this is where I think it gets a little bit interesting, and I think this could be tied into what we're seeing today. That he's going to know, obviously, the enemies are not riding on horses, but it's almost like if you read this, that God is going to make sure that the playing field that Israel is on is level. And so while Israel is going to, and I think what is being referred to here is he's going to provide assistance to the Israeli Defense Forces. On that day, I will strike every horse with panic and its riders with madness, declares the Lord. And he goes on to say, I will keep a watchful eye over Judah, but I will blind all the horses of the nations. Um, if I can find. Let's go back to Exodus chapter 14. Try to get, and we'll come back to it. But Exodus 14. Exodus 14, verses 24. Start in verse 24 of Exodus 14. During the last watch of the night, the Lord looked down from the pillar of fire and cloud at the Egyptian army and threw it into confusion. So we see that while Israel fought the battle, God was throwing the Egyptians into confusion. So what's the difference between that and in verse 4 of Zechariah 12, I will strike every horse with panic and its rider with madness. We have evidence, as stated here, that he will assist them. He jammed the wheels of their chariots so that they had difficulty driving. So, in other words, somehow he popped out the nuts on those chariot wheels. Did anybody did anybody see the movie that was on last week? Noah and the Darkness After It.
Yes.
Ju- It was good. It was excellent. But just remember the one part where they've gone into the Red Sea that God parted, and they found all these ancient chariot wheels.
Really?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Was that
Yeah,
on-
didn't they,
was
didn't
that on
Iran,
Netflix?
one of the governments there forbid them to stop them from doing any more research?
Yeah, they
After-
did.
Once they
They
found
did,
those
but they
wheels?
have photos and they have
Was
proof.
that Netflix?
Pardon me?
Netflix?
It was only on for 2 days.
April 1st.
And the title of it was kind of a documentary. It was more of an educational thing than anything, but it was good. Very
This
well
was theater
done.
last
It
week.
talked
Was
about,
that what?
Theater last week, right?
yeah, the primary theme was the flood, the worldwide flood, Noah's flood, how much is tied into that, and all this evidence to prove that the world is really only 6,000 years
Can you
old.
get it still
Pardon me?
on TV? Yeah.
I don't
It
know.
was
I
in the
don't know
theater.
where it's gonna,
There's
but
one
It was
more-
in a movie theater.
There's one more show. Oh, it's in a movie.
Oh, there is?
theater. On April 1st.
Yes, last Wednesday.
Yeah,
That's what he's
let me
talking
check.
about.
Yeah.
it's just,
That would be Monday, April 1st.
it's gonna be shown again at
Yeah,
Maria's
I'll
saying,
check it out.
okay,
What theater? I went
it's,
to a
it's worth,
whole-
it's worth watching.
In Simsbury.
So yours
Let
was
me
in
check it
the
out.
theater.
Ours was in, it's Buckland Hills. But it also, somebody pointed out last week, like John, that it's, yeah.
We went to the same one at the same time. It was here at Appleton, it was in,
In Simsbury.
it's
Yeah.
actually Simsbury, but it's on 44, like, you think it's Avon.
That was a 2.5 hour movie, 2 hours and 10 minutes.
what's your name?
I ate so much
The Ark.
popcorn
The Ark and the Darkness.
with butter. I gotta have it with butter.
Ark and the Darkness.
You like popcorn? Rick?
Write that down.
Not crazy about it.
No? Oh,
What?
the popcorn. I ate so much popcorn at that
Oh.
movie. It's just crazy.
Yeah,
Oh,
no.
no, it didn't.
So I didn't, you wouldn't eat it.
Oh, I would.
You would?
Oh, absolutely.
With butter?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow. I'm
Absolutely.
surprised.
Really?
So he jammed the wheels of their chariots so that they had difficulty driving. And the Egyptians
I'm
said,
checking, sorry,
no, go ahead.
no, I was checking for.
So it's worth it if you want to see it. And the Egyptians said, let's get away from the Israelites. The Lord is fighting for them against Egypt. So there's evidence that he will, as we're going to see when we get to Ezekiel 38, and this massive invasion, different than what we see right here occurs, that it's God that's going to destroy them by himself, the enemies by himself. We don't see that here. We didn't see it. He helped. And, he's got an eternal, everlasting covenant with Israel. So he is going to provide assistance to them. But what we see is different. Let's just look at,
Same thing with the 6-day war.
yeah, exactly. Judges. Let's take a look at Judges chapter 7. Starting at verse 20. Just evidence that God does get involved.
What version?
Judges, the book of
7:20.
Judges, 7:20. The three companies blew the trumpets and smashed their jar, grasping the torches in their left hands and holding in their right hands the trumpets they were to blow. They shouted, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon." While each man held his position around the camp, the Midianites ran. So, what we have here is Gideon with a limited number, kind of like you were saying, like the past Israeli wars, going up against countless numbers of enemies. And it says, while each man held his position around the camp, all the Midianites ran, crying out as they fled. When the 300 trumpets sounded, the Lord caused the men throughout the camp to turn on each other with their swords. And so that's what we're going to see with Ezekiel 38. That's part of what's going to happen to defeat them. Uh, the army fled to Beth Shittah towards Zerah as far as the borders of Ebel, Maola, near Tabith. So what we see here again is yet another example of where the Lord will intercede on behalf and to help Israel. Anybody have the time?
Yeah. 8:05.
Eight what?
8:05.
Oh, okay. We'll finish real quick. So I wanted to just use that as kind of an example of how God, He's watching over Israel. And I've said right along, right from the very beginning, that something's going to happen that is going to be, I think, miraculous. It's just me talking. I haven't heard it from anybody else. Because when we get to Ezekiel 38, Israel has to be in what they think is peace and safety, peace and security. That doesn't exist right now. That means somehow Hamas has to be defeated. That's why, I mean, God's orchestrating this. God's saying, okay, baby, don't listen to the Biden administration. You go in and do what you have to do. Wipe out Hamas. And then with Hezbollah, we'll see. I'm not sure what's going to happen there, but if that's a major war, that's where I say, and I predict, and I'm just not trying to speculate, but God's got to do something
Oh, yeah.
to defeat that army and make it so that Israel is finally in a position of peace and safety. That's what has to exist when they're attacked by Russia, when they're attacked by Turkey and Iran. That has to be the condition. And with as fast as we see Ezekiel 38 coming into play, something I think's got to happen. We'll see. We'll see what happens. So I'll finish with that. It says that I will keep a watchful eye over Judah. I will bind all the horses that of the nation. So in other words, the IDF's involved here, but God is assisting them. He's leveling the playing field, and what Israel's done so far is just absolutely amazing, in spite of what the world says. In spite of what they've done in just a few months, they wiped out northern Hamas in 2 months. 2 months, and under conditions that nobody's ever experienced before. We said last week, their radar and stuff can't see through concrete, so they've got to fight a much different war than they've ever fought before. So God is helping them. He's got a watchful eye over Judah. I will bind all the horses. And then in verse 5, I'll end with this: the clans of Judah, Jerusalem, Israel will say in their hearts, the people of Jerusalem are strong because the Lord Almighty is their God. So God's going to help them and they're going to recognize it. And there's a lot more to happen as well. But that's kind of what I think is going on. I think we've got this outer circle, and then I'll just throw this up for what it's worth. Inner circle, and this is the outer ring. You see, the inner circle is still over here. This is the inner circle we just looked at. That's not the same group of nations that are referenced, as we'll see when we get to Ezekiel 38. These are the nations. This is Turkey. This is Russia. This is Russia. This is Iran. These are the three primary players. That's actually Russia, 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 Persia, and all of this Togarmah, Tubal, and Gomer are all Turkey. And I'll show you some articles next week about how these nations are coming together. I mean, right now, the leader of Turkey says that he supports what Hamas did. Wasn't that long ago when Jews went to Turkey for their summer vacations? A beautiful place, no more. And prior to 1979, they had a great relationship with Iran, which was Persia, has been changed to Iran. No more. All happened because God's bringing all these events together. So we'll finish with that. Questions, comments, a lot of stuff, but hopefully we're starting to see. This is what amazes me, how it's kind of like he's this master chess player, and he just keeps moving the pieces, moving the pieces. And if you know a little bit about the Bible, like hopefully we all do, it all makes sense because he's told us prophecy is history in advance. That's what it is. But if you're not reading or studying, like 95% of the church, they have no clue, which is pathetic. Uh, but hopefully groups like ours and with other prophecy groups around the country, around the world, I see people like Tom Hughes and Jack Hibbs and Amir Sephardi with hundreds of thousands of followers. People want to know. So it's a blessing, I think, to be able to get together and study this stuff. So watch. I mean, would you rather have been born in the first century, or would you rather be around today? Because I mean, the first century we would have experienced some pretty amazing things, but today we're seeing God's hand. All of this stuff. That's what we need to understand.
And
And
if anybody's interested, go right online, Emmanuel Baptist in Newington. He's doing scripture, the whole Revelations. He's on, I think, 12 or 13 now. But he's left them all up because he feels it's important.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
All right, let's just close in prayer. Father, we thank you for this time, and Lord, bless each of us. I know there's a lot of information being thrown around, and I certainly don't understand everything by any stretch, but I trust it. I know it to be true because you've told us. We don't know all the precise details, but we know, Lord, and we take great stock and just comfort in the fact that you are in control, that you are sovereign, putting the thoughts into people's minds and the leaders' minds that nothing surprises you. You weren't surprised by October 7th. You weren't surprised by uh, all these nations coming against Israel. You were not surprised by the current U.S. administration uh, trying to convince Israel to stop when it would be suicide for them to do so. That doesn't surprise you. You've told us these things would happen. And so, Lord, we thank you for your word. I pray for everyone here, Lord, that we have a blessed time during the coming days. Get together again next week and carry on and look at what you tell us about Ezekiel, about the Ezekiel Magog war. And just thank you. I ask that you bless everyone, bless our families, to be with us in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.